This weekend, I was privileged to have the opportunity to go up to Middle Tennessee to speak at the Rolling Hills congregation, where our good brother David Tomley is the preacher. David, of course, did our fall meeting for us, and they wanted to do a short mini-series, which was on Friday night and then on Saturday morning, to talk about some things related to why we should believe in God. And part of what drew them to want to do this was because of concerns for the kind of world that increasingly is growing darker, that our young people are coming up in, and they wanted to do some things to strengthen them. So I spoke on Friday night to everybody, and then on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, the kids came from 4th grade up through 12th grade, and we had a special class. And I remember when I had to go to school on a Saturday a couple times. We had a blizzard, and I had to go to school to make up the days in 4th grade. And so I told the kids I understood this could be difficult to have to come on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock to a class. But I just want you all to see that I absolutely mesmerized them in my presentation. They were just hanging on every word, and it was a very effective study. Now, I actually had to say, this was a pretty remarkable group of young ladies and gentlemen. They sat there. Actually, class went for about an hour, and then they wanted to just ask questions for about 15 minutes. And I mean, even from the very youngest, they were just so attentive and engaged and sharp. So it was a really neat experience. But one of the things that just stood out to me, one of the very youngest kids who was there, who was probably in 5th grade, 4th or 5th grade, said, yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an atheist, and he said, but it was just that phrase. Like, when I was in the 4th grade, I didn't even know what the word atheist meant. And I certainly didn't know anybody who was an atheist. And his account of what he experienced just represents the statistical realities of unbelief, which is growing as generations get younger in our country. And this year, when the elders picked the theme of growing together, one of the sub-emphases that we wanted to focus on was growing deeper in our faith together. And in keeping with that, from time to time, I want to do some lessons that are designed to help encourage us to grow deeper in our faith. And I think that one of the best ways to begin thinking about how to grow deep in our faith is to contemplate what the alternative is. And that's what I want to talk with you about this morning. I want to talk with you about what reality is like if there is no God. On an unfortunately regular basis, I get emails or text messages or other kinds of messages or calls from, generally speaking, younger friends of mine who are struggling in their faith and are considering walking away from their faith. And I understand that. I mean, by nature, I'm kind of a doubter and a questioner anyway, so I'm very sympathetic to this struggle. But one of the things that I have found to be the case is, while they have given a certain amount of scrutiny to Christianity, they have not given a lot of scrutiny to the alternative. And I think just in the interest of fairness, of seeing both sides, we should take a very clear-eyed look at what reality is like if, in fact, there is no God. And I don't want you to take just my word for this. I actually want to use as a springboard for the lesson today a book written by an atheist philosopher from Duke University whose name is Alex Rosenberg, called The Atheist's Guide to Reality. And here is how this book begins. What he says at the very start of the book is, there is no God, there is no soul. All that exists is matter, particles of matter, clumps of stuff. And anything else that we think exists, not only God, but anything else that we think exists, is simply an illusion. It's a figment of our imagination. In fact, I don't know if you can read what the subtitle of the book is. It's Enjoying Life Without Illusions. That's why the cover has this sort of like optical illusion kind of cover to it. So what I want us to think about then, based on what he tells us in the book, is what is reality if there is no God? And here is the first thing that he is very straightforward in saying. If there is no God, right and wrong do not exist. Now, of course, we believe that right and wrong exist because we believe there is a God who tells us what is right and wrong. In fact, we believe something even more fundamental than that. When, for example, we're going to see in the book of Leviticus, God says, "Be holy," he explains the reason is, "For I am holy." In other words, the instructions that God gives to us are a reflection of his very nature. We not only believe that there's good and evil, we believe God is good. He is perfect goodness. Taste and see the Lord is good, Psalm 34 says. And so that's why you and I, as Christians, would believe that right and wrong exist. But if there is no God, if all that exists is particles of matter, then here's what this philosopher says. Atheism rejects the distinction between acts that are morally permitted, morally forbidden, and morally required. And I want you to know this is not simply an academic who says this. Through various life experiences, I have acquired an unusual assortment of friends on Facebook. It is quite a diverse lot. Some of them are friends that I've known since I was in elementary school. And a few years ago, I just posed some questions for my skeptical friends about why they believe in right and wrong. And one of my oldest friends from back in sheer elementary school days when I was a kid said this: "The brotherhood of man is a social construct." Stop and think about that a second. Why do we believe that there is a sense in which we are a brotherhood of humanity? Well, you can't have brothers without a father. The reason we believe in some concept of the brotherhood of humanity is because we believe, as Paul says in Ephesians 4, that God is the Father of all. But if you don't believe there is a God who is Father of all, you can't believe that we are all, in some sense, brothers. So that's why she says, this is just us. We made this up. That's what social construct means. We made it up. Much like religion, she's kind of throwing some shade at me there in this comment, that unites the tribe, the society, provides for stability and growth. It's a force for good, or can be, or should be. But it seems to me that the value of human life, anything, comes from that social stability, security, and social norm. So if you trace this all the way back to the start, the value of human life is nothing more than a social construct. It could be a force for good for your tribe. But what about another tribe? What if you think there are people outside of your tribe who are a threat to your tribe? I will give the author of this book credit. He very forthrightly understands that in his view of the world, if there is no right and wrong, it is very hard to criticize what Hitler and the Nazis did. In fact, he even says this: there are lots of moral values and ethical norms that enlightened people reject, but which Mother Nature has strongly selected for. Let me explain what he's getting at here. Because he believes that all that exists is particles of stuff. All we are, he would say, is the product of evolution, which is the product of Mother Nature. And if that is the case, then he says, here's what Mother Nature has selected for: racism, xenophobia, people who are strangers, people that you don't know. He says it has said that they are optimally adapted to maximize the representation of your genes. In other words, what he's saying is that evolution predisposes me to say, I want to take care of people who look like me, and the other people who don't look like me could be a threat, and I don't care about them. Now, he happens to go on to say, fortunately, most people are not Nazis. Big comfort that is. Because if you believe at the end of the day that what we think of as right and wrong is nothing more than a social construct, that it's just an illusion, you cannot really argue that one tribe of people can be faulted for doing harm to another tribe of people if they think they are a threat. And here is the thing. Intuitively, we understand this is not the case. I don't know too many people right now who are saying, well, human rights are a mere social construct, so it doesn't matter what's going on in Europe. There's political ramifications you can talk about, military, strategic things you can talk about. But do you realize you can't even talk in terms, in theory, of someone being a war criminal or violating international human rights if you don't believe there's any such thing as an international sense of shared right and wrong? So I asked some of my friends one time, if you believe right and wrong is just something we make up, and it's just for your tribe and your culture, what about tribes and cultures, literally tribes and cultures that take little girls into slavery and sell them into sex trafficking? If this is nothing more than what we're making up, how could you condemn that? I'll tell you what my old elementary school friend said. She said, I guess I didn't take enough philosophy classes because I don't see these questions as, you don't have to take any philosophy classes to know you shouldn't do that. And this is the point. Once you pull the rug out from under reality by saying that there is nothing but molecules in motion, then you have no reason to say that anything ultimately is right or wrong. Now, I want to stress this point because when my unbelieving friends hear this, they misunderstand me to be saying that they themselves act in a wicked way. That's not the case at all. I will be the first to say that unbelieving people I know sometimes act with more integrity than I do. You remember when the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians and he says, you know, you've got a man who is with his father's wife, and he says to them, not even the pagans would do this. Paul is making this very point. There is no question that there are people who are unbelievers who live better lives of integrity than professed believers. That's not what is at issue here. What is at issue here is, how do you explain why some things are right and some things are wrong? And atheism says you can't because those things don't exist. Which of course does bring up another question. If ultimately there is no right or wrong, why would we arrest people and imprison people and punish people for choosing to do what is wrong? Well, according to Rosenberg, not only does right and wrong not exist, free will does not exist. Now, of course, you and I believe, as the Bible often calls upon people, choose this day who you will serve. We believe that in addition to being material beings, there's something in us the Bible calls the inner man. There is the soul. And a part of the capability of the soul is to make choices. And sometimes it makes choices that go against what the body wants. Like when you really want, for example, to have donuts. But you know that you really shouldn't do that for your best health. So your body wants one thing, but your mind says, no, you shouldn't do that. We believe that that makes sense given what we understand about the world. But if you believe that all we are molecules in motion, then just as I throw this clump of matter up and it simply operates under the laws of physics, makes no choice in the matter, the same is true with us. And so, this professor says, every state of my brain is fixed by physical facts. There is no free will, just the feeling, the illusion of introspection. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute. I know that's not the case. I can think about choices I have made. Well, he would say, no, you can't. Because thinking does not exist. Now, why do we believe we're able to think about things? Why can Paul say in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind? Because we believe that in addition to the physical aspect of us, we have something that is not physical. We have a soul which has an intellect, and it has a mind that can think. But if everything is just clumps of matter, then here is the question we are faced with. It's not that I have donuts on the brain all the time or anything. I just happen to use this illustration here. So here is one of my favorite thinkers contemplating one of my favorite thoughts. Now, if what Rosenberg says is true, then Homer does not have a soul and does not have a mind. He just has a brain, a clump of matter. And that clump of matter is fundamentally the same as the clump of matter represented by the donut, a clump of fat, sugary, delicious matter, but it's still just a clump of matter. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the donut thinking about? The answer would be nothing. Donuts can't think about anything. But if Homer's mind is just his brain, which is just a clump of matter like the donut, then to ask the question, what is Homer thinking about, would be to say nothing. So as Rosenberg says, how can one clump of stuff anywhere in the universe be about some other clump of stuff anywhere else in the universe? So when I gave the slide that says thinking doesn't exist, Preston gave me a look like, what are you talking about? And I agree with that look. But you imagine if you were to go into Professor Rosenberg's office one day, and if you were to see him stroking his chin, and you were to say, Professor Rosenberg, what are you thinking about? The only consistent answer he would be able to give is nothing. Because one clump of stuff can't be about any other clump of stuff in the world. These are the consequences. I understand if someone struggles with their faith. I understand how hard it can be sometimes to follow Christ. But do you really want to accept these alternatives? No right and wrong, no free will, no thinking. Now, you might be saying, I'm sitting here right now thinking about things. I am consciously aware that I am thinking of things. No, you're not. Because if there is no God, consciousness itself does not exist. Now, I will say that as I gaze about the audience this morning, I can see that in some instances, it might be fluctuating this morning. But that's a different thing entirely from saying consciousness itself does not exist. Think about the story of the prodigal son. The Bible says he came to himself, and he talks to himself. That's consciousness. And he's aware of his surroundings. I'm with the pigs, and I'm hungry, and I should go home. All of those aspects of the kind of thing that we believe we can do because we believe that there is a God. But just as I said to you a moment ago, a donut doesn't think about anything. A donut is not conscious of anything either. The donut doesn't know what shape it is. It doesn't know what flavor it is. It certainly doesn't know that Homer's thinking about it and then probably is going to eventually consume it. That's just not the kind of thing a donut is. It doesn't have consciousness. But if that's what all of us ultimately are, just atoms in motion, then it means that we aren't conscious either. We can't sense pain. We can't see color. We really can't hear sound. We can't do any of those things. And so here's what he says. When consciousness assures us that we have thoughts about stuff, it has to be wrong. I think. That would be the funny thing if it just, I think that, because it's just obviously so inherently self-contradictory. So just to illustrate this point, how many of you have ever seen one of these things before? I'm glad to see even younger people shaking their head yes, so that it's not just us old people. So when I go and have my knees looked at periodically, they'll take x-rays. Once they did an MRI, some of you have had this experience. And when they do this, they can see all of the matter, all of the particles, they can see all of that. And yet they still ask me, what's your level of pain? Why are they asking me that? They can see all the material stuff. The reason they're asking me is because there is a me to ask. There is a consciousness that is different just from my body that can say on which level that I find myself to be in pain. But do you understand, if you don't believe in consciousness, it would never make any sense if you were in the medical profession and believe this, to ever ask anybody, how much pain are you in? There's no one there to ask. It's just clumps of matter. You might as well be talking to a ghost. Or, as another one of these people says, the absurdity of saying nobody has ever felt pain is no greater than that of saying nobody has ever seen a demon. So I know we have a lot of you who are nurses and in the medical field. Please don't do this. When somebody comes in and says, I'm in pain, don't say to them, your C fibers are firing. Please be sympathetic and kind to them. Because in addition to fibers and tissue and cells, there's more to us than that actually can sense and feel pain. But not according to Rosenberg, not according to atheism. There is no self, no soul, no person. The self as conveyed to us by introspection is fiction. It doesn't exist. Let me just pause and make this comment. I recognize one of the reasons to struggle with faith. Really, I think it's the only argument that we have to deal with is the problem of evil and suffering. If God is good and God is powerful, why do evil and suffering exist? Now, I think the Bible has some answers to that question, but I just want you to see that question does not even make sense if this is what reality is like. Because if there is no God, there is no right and wrong. That means there is no evil. And if there is no God and therefore no consciousness, we do not even actually suffer. All of that is just an illusion. And that's the problem of evil and suffering for atheism, and it is a much bigger problem for atheism than it is for Christianity. Because all of us understand that there is genuine evil and suffering in the world. Now, last week was midterms over at Florida College, maybe some other colleges, so are you now ready for your midterm exam, or actually it's your final exam for this sermon? And I'm going to use a embarrassing childhood episode for the purposes of this final exam today. When I was in the third grade, I was sitting at a big table and we were coloring. And John Brooks was sitting right across from me. And John Brooks had the crayons. And I asked for the crayons, and he wouldn't give me the crayons. And I got mad, and I grabbed him by the throat and started wringing his neck. So this is an embarrassing memory. And all I can say is, for you little people, if I ask for the crayons, you just better give them to me, okay? We just don't want any more ugliness around here. So here is the final exam. I am reflecting on whether I should have chosen to cause pain to John Brooks to get the colored crayons. If atheism is true, how many of these statements make sense? Well, first of all, if there is no right or wrong, the word should has no place in the dictionary. So we can just scratch that one off the list. And if there is no free will, there was certainly no choice to be made. It was just the laws of physics, after all, so I can scratch have chosen off the slide. if there is no thinking, then there is certainly no reflecting that is taking place. And if there is no consciousness, there is no conscious experience of pain. So there was no John Brooks to feel any pain, and there was no me to see any color. Which means that if atheism is true, all that is left are crayons. Colorless crayons. Particles of matter. And I believe that deep down inside, we all know this is not the case. Now, I don't want to say this about everybody who doesn't believe. I believe that there are people who have genuine questions. But there's another factor involved in belief. This morning in the table talk, I read to you from Luke chapter 8, the story of the man who had the legion of demons, who begged Jesus for mercy, and so he casts them out. Delivers this man. You would think the people of that region would have been so overjoyed by what Jesus did. They would say, please stay here and help us. Do you know what those people said to Jesus? Would you please leave? Because if he can control demons, they can't control him. And there is an issue here, not for everyone, but for some people. If I believe there is a God, I can't control him. I have to answer to him. Now, because God is perfect goodness, to embrace God is to embrace perfect, eternal happiness. But you just have to look beyond the things of this life, like the writer of Ecclesiastes, and look beyond life under the sun, which is vanity, and see, as Preston read for us this morning, that the conclusion is to fear God and to keep his commandments. And if we can help you to do that this morning, we'd love for you to let us know how we can while we stand and sing together.